Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here with me. I want to start with thanking our sponsor, Valor Ridge. Thanks to them, we're able to open it up to the public. Let me start about saying a little bit about what we do, who we are. Before we get started, if anybody has any questions throughout this entire lecture, please email to info@NYS Jewish Gun Club. Please put in the subject line Sinai. We'll forward it to the rabbi, and he'll take some Q&A. If we don't get to all the questions, we'll email them back to you. What we are, we have two entities that work together. We have the NOES Jewish Gun Club. With that, we train, we promote gun ownership in the Jewish community. Then we have our non-for-profit United Jewish Gun Coalition. That's a 501c3, and we use that for our litigation, education, promotion, and advocacy work for the Second Amendment. The different stuff we do with those two entities, we do Second Amendment litigation, Second Amendment advocacy, firearms, safety education. Then we have some community safety programs, and then we have also Second Amendment education programs. Some of the litigations that we have that are ongoing right now, we have the Goldstein v. Hochul. That's where we're suing the New York State government for enacting a slew of new regulations. What we are litigating specifically is the ability for us to be able to carry a firearm in the house of worship. Then we have other ones also where we are suing for FOIA requests that they are denying, and they're stonewalling for various issues. One we have against Rockland County. Soon as after the Supreme Court ruled on the Bruin, they paused issuing pistol permits, and so we're suing for that. And then we also have the one down in Suffolk County. We were involved in a case where the county confiscated someone's firearms under the red flag laws. We were able to help them get it back, and within the lawsuit, we realized there's a lot of shenanigans going on. So we FOIA'd a bunch of documents, and we are suing them for that. Now, let me introduce you to Rabbi Homnick. Rabbi Homnick is somebody that Rabbi Homnick is somebody that has written lots of books, scholarly writings on the Talmud and also on Torah. He is a fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. He has been the deputy editor at the American Spectator. Teaching has been something part of his entire life and his entire career. I'm really happy to be able to bring this program. I think it's an important aspect. So, Rabbi, why don't you start, and I'll leave, and you can take over.
Fabulous. Thank you for your kind words. And the one bad side effect of Zoom is that whenever I give a lecture on Zoom, I tend to sit down. And part of the advantage of doing a lecture in person is that you stand at the lectern and somehow you get a different kind of body language that you're able to inject into it. And sitting down is sort of intrinsically a less dramatic mode. So we have to shift to a little more scholarly tone, which is fine, but we just have to acclimate ourselves to the environment. So it's a very interesting thing. My father, to rest in peace, passed away at the beginning of COVID a couple of years ago. Lived to almost 89 years old. And when he was a kid, they had the Israel War of Independence. At that time, he was born in 1931, so at that time he was, let's say, 17. And they were trying to get Americans to participate in the war on the side of Israel. So they started these gun clubs in Manhattan, and young Jews would come down there and trainer, and if somebody stood out to the trainers, they would tip off the recruiters and they would try to get them to come to fight in Israel. So my father and his older brother both attended that club. And my father was the crack shot. He was really winning all the awards. So, but he was a little young. He was 17. They didn't know if they could make a move on him. So they recruited my uncle. My uncle actually outlived my father. He just passed away about a year ago. He was 94. So my uncle was eager to go to Israel to fight. And he came home and told my grandfather. My grandfather was a very nice man. He was a pharmacist in the east side of New York. He had a degree in pharmacy from Columbia University, which no longer has a school of pharmacy, but at that time they did. And, he was a very intelligent man, obviously a professional, had a good sense of humor. Well, my uncle told him that he wants to go overseas to fight. My grandfather went up to the roof and threatened to jump. So my uncle wasn't going to push it that hard, so he didn't end up going. And once my father saw that my uncle's not going, so he for sure was going to raise the issue. But he had a fondness for shooting because he had demonstrated an ability at it. With me, I ended up serving in Israel, not in the regular army, but in the reserves, because I moved to Israel for a 10-year period that started when I was about 30. And at 30 years old, I was in good enough shape to fight in the reserves. So there are ways for, as a scholar, there are ways to avoid it, but I don't think I should try to take the easy way out. So I went in. In fact, later when some of my mates that were in the same barracks as me were killed in a terrorist attack. So my wife came down to the base, and she was went in to see the camp doctor and said, "You can't keep my husband here. He's a scholar, And they said to her, "Well, you should be proud of your husband. That he's not hiding behind being a scholar and he's willing to fight." So she quickly changed tracks and said, "No, I'm very proud." And so that scene ended very differently than it began. But so I'm glad that God gave me that opportunity. I don't have any great heroic stories to tell about my time in the reserves, other than the fact that I had a tendency when on guard duty, I like to sing because it's very boring to be on guard duty. So I would sing, and then nobody complained to me directly, but they obviously went and complained to the superiors, to the officers, and they said, "This guy's singing on guard duty. I don't know if that's protocol." So the next time they sent us out, they announced a new rule. We have a new rule: no singing allowed. So rather than chastise me for singing, they just made a new rule. And I got a kick out of it because it was pretty clear that I had provided the inspiration for this new rule. In any case, but it was a great honor in my life in those moments to feel that I was among those who protected the Holy Land of Israel. I'd like to believe that if danger came upon me, that I was prepared to deal with it. When they first started to teach us how to shoot, I was not the best shot because I hadn't shot before in the United States, but I was pretty proud because I never missed a target. I mean, I wasn't hitting the heart, but I was hitting parts of the target. And I counted, like I took 10 shots, yeah, they're all there. So I was kind of proud. And then, but there was other guys in the unit who were immigrants from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, to Israel. They had fought in the Soviet army. So when I looked at what they were doing to the targets, it was like bzzz, they were all right around the heart. I went, oh my goodness, I can't compete with that. But in any case, it was an experience and something that I feel, in, as we say in Jewish terms, it's a merit that I was in some way defending the people of the land of Israel. So I like to talk. Those who read my book know that my book begins with a certain point, and although I very much would like you to read the book, it's well worth your time and I guess the money. But and I'm not going to recite the whole book here, obviously. But this first point is the launching place for this topic, because in the Torah and the Bible's description of what happens to the Jewish people when they're redeemed from Egypt. What's the first thing that happens? Now, for those who are biblical scholars, they're probably aware that in the text itself, you might get the impression that the Jews are not considered redeemed until after they cross the sea. In the text, it seems to read that way, but the Jewish tradition does not accept that idea. The Jewish tradition is that no, the Jews are redeemed on the night of the 15th day of Nisan, the first month in the Hebrew calendar, which was the night that the firstborn of the Egyptians died, and Pharaoh said, "Get out." So we consider that legally, that was emancipation. The fact that Pharaoh later as an afterthought said, "Whoa, I want to bring them back," that was him backsliding. But again, it doesn't exactly read this way on the simple reading of the text. It sounds more like Pharaoh only gave them permission to go for a few days, and but the fact is, the Jewish tradition believes very strongly now that whole earlier discussion that we only want to go for a few days, that was past. Pharaoh didn't buy into that. He never agreed to that. Or he would agree and then pull it back. Whatever, he was playing cat and mouse game, but that never happened. So by the time the firstborn was killed and Pharaoh came to the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the children of Israel, when he came to them that night through the emissaries Moshe and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, and he said to them, "Go." That meant emancipation. They were no longer slaves of Pharaoh. And when he came after them to the sea, that was him trying to cheat on the deal. And so the whole splitting of the sea, that's a bonus miracle. That's not the redemption. The redemption is earlier. Why is this key? It's key to this episode of when does the Bible mention that the Jews were armed? It mentions it as they're heading out towards the sea at a point where, again, in Jewish law, tradition, understanding, they were already a free nation. They were legally under their own dominion. They were no longer under Pharaoh's dominion. So at that time, it talks a little bit about how they packed their stuff up, how they carried the food. There's a little bit of plebeian type description of what the scene looked like. But actually in the synagogue, in the Jewish tradition, it's a separate reading of the Torah that begins. It's called B'Shalach. Begins after these events, after the Pharaoh kicked them out, they're hitting the road, and then the first sentence that launches this new reading is, it says in it that V'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim, that the Jewish people left Egypt in the condition of chamushim. It's a Hebrew word, chamushim. So what is the meaning of that Hebrew word? So it has a primary meaning and it has some indicatory meanings. That's part of how the way the traditional understanding of Hebrew and how to read the Bible operates. That a word has its own meaning, and then it also has nuances that connect it to secondary meanings. And we view that as part of the big picture. So, but the primary meaning of the word Vachamushim, which says that the Jews left in this condition, the children of Israel left Chamushim. What does Chamushim mean? Chamushim means armed. That because earlier when it was talking about packing, it was talking about food, things like that, and it was what they need to subsist day to day. But now, for the first time, there's a moment of pause when we say, by the way, they left fully armed. So it seems pretty much, and especially in the tradition of the reading, where the weekly reading actually begins at that point. The first thing it says is, at the time that Pharaoh sent the Jews out of Egypt, the Jewish people was fully armed. The children of Israel were fully armed. Again, it's not how the King James translation, but that's the Jewish traditional translation. And it's critical when we think in terms of the U.S. Constitution, and the First Amendment speaks about freedom of speech. The Second Amendment speaks about the right to bear arms. But in terms of freedom as expressed in the Bible, is signified very early on, pretty much immediately. It says Pharaoh sent them out, and they were armed. And this really supports, incidentally, what I'm saying earlier, that according to the tradition, Pharaoh had no rights to it anymore. And when he came after them later, he was now within his rights by any standard. So part of the proof of that is that the proof that they had already been established as an independent nation from the night when Pharaoh came and said, get out, the proof in the pudding, so to speak, the proof that you can see with your own eyes, is that they went out armed. And of course, Pharaoh was just letting them out for a 3-day road trip, and they were fully legally subservient to him. There's no way he's letting them go out marching like an army with guns. So the guns are the symbol. Again, they didn't have guns, they had different kind of weapons. But the point is that when you're an armed individual, that's a symbol of a free individual. And the English word armed really is a helpful word, because they actually describe it as an extension of the human arm. And so there's an idea of you're more of a person, because you have extra power beyond your up close, limited ability to fight with your hands, but you have some power to project your strength. That makes you a little more of a person, and certainly more of a free person. Now, again, I know I have to go through the Hebrew technicalities to make some of the points, and not everyone listening this evening is familiar with the Hebrew, so you have to take my word for it. And I'll try not to dwell on it to a point of, distraction and like scholarly things that you can't follow. But the point is that Hebrew word, so before we even go to the alternate meanings, but the main meaning, that they were armed, is interesting, because it said, V'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael mi'Mitzrayim, that armed the Jews left from Egypt, or really literally armed, they left, the Jews, from Egypt. So they actually put the word armed, the adjective armed, before they even identified the people. It's a very interesting subtlety of language. But usually you say Jewish people were armed. it says they were armed, people of Israel. So it's a way of indicating that the people we're about to introduce to you, they're armed, and that is the prelude, that is a prerequisite to speak about them as a nation. What do you mean they're not a nation? There's a bunch of guys who were slaves yesterday, and they don't know where they're going yet or how they're going. They're finding their footing. And we said, no, armed. Armed, they left, the Jewish people. There's a possibility of being a people because they left armed. But, and again, this is subtleties of reading in Hebrew that it's not easy to translate exactly to convey it in the English. That again, by saying first they were armed before they said they were a nation, it implies that the individual has the right to be armed. And if it only said the nation was armed, you would say, okay, yeah, that I understand. A nation has a military. Nobody's saying, if the people are against the Second Amendment, don't say it shouldn't be a military. Of course, there's a military. So, if you want to say that, you say the nation had armaments. In the same kind of way you would say the nation was militarized. The nation had a military. But instead, it said first they were armed. The people, essentially, of the nation. So it tells you that the right to be armed inheres in the individual citizenship of the individual people. And then that adds up to a nation. It coalesces into a nation so that their individual rights are able to coalesce into a national system. But if you're going to have people without individual rights, they're only slaves. That's what we just took them out from there. And this is a key point, which is this is the moment, the point, the threshold, we could say, between being servants. There's a whole drama of God for the first time expressing his will in the world in the fullest way. And he does it by taking the people that were servants and making them free, and then as free people to accept upon them the kingship of God and to follow his instructions. Not to use the freedom for selfishness, to use the freedom for higher goals. But it's first structured as having the freedom. And so at this exact moment, where we're trying to dramatize this whole idea, these are the children of Abraham, and they went through all this suffering. And God came and he didn't just take them out, but he took them out dramatically because he kept bringing plagues on the Egyptians, one by one. Now, it's interesting, by the way, that every once in a while, even in today's day and age, you get little glimpses happen of what those plagues were like. And I've always believed that this is God's way of reminding us periodically. And I've noticed in the calendar, you can go on YouTube and do some back research and Google, but I'm pretty sure I've consistently noticed in the calendar that it happens around Passover time. So Passover, when we are celebrating the Exodus from Egypt, very often one of these plagues that befell the Egyptians, which are really one time in history and they don't recur on any kind of periodic basis. But there's a little flavor of it. So, for example, just an example, a couple of years ago, and this was after there was YouTube and there was internet and YouTube and all of this. But a few years ago, all of a sudden on a highway in Greece, there came a plague of frogs. One highway, a stretch of highway. I don't remember how many miles. You could look it up. And suddenly, frogs came out of nowhere, everywhere. And they were all focusing and concentrating, swarming on this highway. So at first, the drivers thought, all right, I'll go anyway, I'll ignore it. But it didn't work because that viscous, the liquid quality on the skin of the frog it becomes slippery, and the car tires, they try to go over it, and people veered off and crashed into the side. I don't know if anyone got hurt, but the point was they realized, no, you cannot drive over frogs. A new discovery. The automobile is around for 100 years, but it never occurred to anybody to wonder, can you drive automobiles over a swarm of frogs? The answer turns out to be no, you can't, because they're too slippery. And the result was that there was a stretch of highway, and this is all happening in the modern world. The TV, look, Greek TV is covering it, and you see the regular active people. It's a modern kind of episode, but they're having the plague of frogs. It's limited, whatever. But God's sending a message. I can do this stuff. I don't. I choose not. But don't ever make the mistake of thinking that I can. So we had with locusts also a couple of years ago in Africa some episodes like that, and that's it. You get little sense in little windows every once in a while. Crazy hail that's outsized with photography going on, showing you each piece of hail looks like a baseball. So the point is, God can do that, and certainly can do plagues of people dying. In that case, he telegraphed that he's choosing the firstborn. But we've certainly seen plagues, and COVID itself was not exactly that structure of a plague, but in some ways larger, some ways less focused, but it reminds us. And so the point was, what God did was he sent the world a message that you don't get to subjugate decent people and hold them for slaves. Especially once I've communicated to you prophetically not to do it. So you're going to lose your rights, you're going to get punished, all of that, and they're going to be free. And so here's this moment, and so it has significance to the Jewish people individually, of course, but throughout the process, God repeats to Moses, that this is so the world will know and it's a series of lessons for the world. And the great Jewish commentator Nachmanides, who lived in the 1200s and early 1300s, if I'm not mistaken, he keeps explaining this. These are messages to the entire world to remember this: that God, I control the world. You're here by my mercy. You're my guest. You don't get to just subjugate people for no reason, etc. And in all of that, so it's all about the understanding the drama, understanding the background, understanding the scenery, the scene, the scenario, the picture of what's before you. And you're marching these people out to send this message, not to just the people alive that time, but this is going to be written in the greatest book of history, the book that's been more read, more translated than any other book. And in that, at the key point, at the high point, when the Jews get to the Jewish people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, whatever you want to call them at that moment in time, when they get to assert their freedom from Pharaoh, and they're heading out as a group, as a nation, but as a collection of individuals as well, this is the point the Torah, the Bible accentuates, that every person has a weapon. There's a powerful message there, that what it is to be a human being, each individual human being, each citizen, is intrinsically a wielder of great power. When we get into these little battles in America, we're going back and forth. I know my rights. You're taking my rights away. It sounds petty. It pretty much has to sound petty in the moment, because it's like you're telling your mother, give me my allowance. She says, no, you lost your allowance. In the moment, it seems like very petty, like a small fight between a strict teacher and a uppity kid. But in the bigger picture, no. All of the structure of human freedom is being demonstrated here. And part of human freedom is the power of each individual. But why are we giving? What do you mean? The guy's free, so I should put a big gun in his hand? And you can see where they're coming from. The non-religious people, they're very scared of the guns. Like, and in political debates, we always say, well, you take everyone's knife away, you're gonna take every other thing away. I mean, there's always ways to hurt people, but somehow the gun is very symbolic and significant to them. And I'm saying why? Like everything in the world, when the bad people are against something, it's because there's a goodness there. It's the goodness that's triggering them. And what is the goodness? The goodness is the message of the power of the human being, what one human being can accomplish if you take upon yourself the responsibility to stand up. And okay, so standing up for your own family, that's a noble thing in and of itself. It's your rights for yourself, and also it's beyond yourself. It's your family, expanding the zone of people that you care about, you, your family, your community, your school, the people in your business, the people in your synagogue, in your church. You expand out the zone, and then you fight for your country. You eventually get to that as well. But it's because there may be another way to start going from the country down. The country is important, and so the people are important. But that's not the intrinsic importance of the human. It's not because he's from the country. It's not my citizenship that gives me my first significance. My first significance is because I'm created by God in the image of God as a human being. It gives me great power. Whatever I can do to develop my mind and my ability to understand things and to impact things through understanding, maybe this guy wins a Nobel Prize. He figured out an important thing, helps out all of humanity. This guy's a doctor. This woman is a doctor. They're saving lives. And, how much impact one person can have. It can be multiplied. So, part of the idea, I would say symbolically, that, let's say, if I can stand and shoot a gun and shoot 10 bullets in a minute and a half, and let's say with an ideal situation is 10 bad guys come. They're really determined to drop a bomb and kill 1 million people, 1,000 people. So taking away the moral question of why these 10 guys have to go. Clearly they're evil. They have to go. And now I'm one guy with a gun. And I feel, based on my skills and my preparation and my practice, my experience, that I could take all of them out, all 10, with my gun. If I time it just right, if I make my move just right, I could take them all out. So think of it. That's a metaphor for the human being in general. In other words, it's just like this guy is a hero, and then he's going to get the Congressional Medal of Honor because he killed the 10 bad guys and saved the innocent people, and he certainly deserves it. But this guy wrote a book, and 100,000 people read it and inspired them. It's a self-help book and inspired people to make more of their lives. So this one guy, or woman, that's not the point, this one person impacted hundreds of thousands of people, and in a good way, in a positive way. Of course, you have to be extremely careful not to impact in a negative way, because your impact can be multiplied. The higher you are in society, the more your decisions affect a greater number of people. But that's the beauty of it. And the way that the actual way that the Bible gets this idea across, it's not just the intrinsic right to the weapon, but that the weapon is actually used to convey this initial message of how powerful each person is. And so when we say, on the literal sense, that the Israelites left Egypt with arms, with the power to make an impact, it's a symbol for much more than that. It's a reminder to each of us. We all We all have arms. Even if you didn't go out and buy an actual gun and exercise your Second Amendment right. But the point is, the Second Amendment is a symbol of freedom. It's right there at the beginning of the Constitution. In the Constitution, this is an interesting point I like to make, that in the Constitution, the first thing it talks about is freedom of speech and expression. Very critical. And in biblical terms, the human being, the first thing that marks the human being as such is his ability to speak. God breathes into the soul, into the human being, and that he's able to speak. So certainly that's one type of number one. And then they put second the idea of carrying a weapon and being able to affect outcomes beyond the limited range of one. Yeah, the 150-pound weakling who is getting dust kicked in his face in the comic book on the beach, the guy who likes his girlfriend, that whole image. But the first thing when Samuel Colt made his revolver, they called it the Equalizer. And they specifically marketed it to women and to people who were weaker. And they said, "This is the Equalizer. Doesn't matter. Nobody's stronger than you now. You have the gun. You're just as strong as anybody else." But that is really in the original biblical concept of saying, Pharaoh sent the Jews out. He relinquished his ownership over them, and they were armed. They got all the powers. Because with freedom comes all the powers of the human being. The power to think, to communicate, to teach others, to get married, create a family, raise a family, to be part of a community, to be active in the community, to impact the community, to be part of the city, part of the state, all the concentric circles of life, and to see how far of an impact your personhood can have. But the gun is the symbol. So yes, in self-defense area or in the military situations or in policing situations, the gun has a particular use. But in the larger symbol, it's a reminder that, what? I'm more powerful than my own, 200 pounds and the 150 I can lift in the gym. I can stand up. Recently, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. And it turned out that it lasted on the books for exactly 50 years because 1972 they made Roe versus Wade. In 2022, it was overturned. And especially Jews who go to synagogue are familiar with the idea. We just read about it last week. Of the idea of the Jubilee, of the Yovel, which is that every 50 years you actually celebrate a renewal. You do certain things to support it, to acknowledge it, but on a deeper sense, there's a message that the world is always changing. And if you look at it in 50-year segments, you can kind of identify. Well, look at us. I mean, we're only 100 years since they started being automobiles, 150 years since the telephone, 150 to 200 years since there's a railroad. And certainly 100 years since aviation and planes. So the entire life that we live is a redefined version. And the Jewish vision has always understood that the world will continue to redefine itself. It's not today's subject, but that's all through the prophecies and the way things are structured. That we always understand that God is building out a world, that the world keeps growing out, and we have to function within that. It's a privilege for us to function within that. But here in this episode with Roe versus Wade, it was just a fabulous message because there was a lot of people who didn't want to fight it. and guys like me were after encouraging people to fight. And we said, why you don't have to accept it. It's not written in stone. Fight back against it. You'll be able to push it back. And exactly the 50-year cycle of the Jubilee, of the Yovel, it went away. And actually, off the record, there are organizations that opted out of fighting Roe versus Wade, where we would come to these organizations and say, well, you're a ethical organization, you're a religious organization, why won't you fight it? Nah, it was done already, what's done is done. No, that's not how we operate, what's done is done. That's the whole, the Jews in Egypt could have said, yeah, what's done is done, and that's the end. No. It's not how it works. We fight back against things that are wrong. There's sometimes evil people pushing the things that are wrong, and then sometimes fairly innocent people who misunderstand me, who end up on the wrong side of things. Okay, that's all right. But the point is, you have to stand strong. And you can only stand strong if you believe that you are strong. If you don't believe you are strong, well, who am I? What can I accomplish? And consequently, you end up not accomplishing it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Who am I? The thing that the gun does, and again, you don't actually have to own the gun. You're entitled to own the gun. But the idea that you as an individual can project your power in the name of righteousness, and we hope you get it right, and that your sense of righteousness is right, but you can accomplish much more than you think you can. And just like, well, if I'm standing here, I know that I'm very limited in my ability to do something against that robber. But if I pick up a gun, I know I have a good shot at taking him out. It's the intrinsic message is important to be accompanied by the symbolic message. It has to resonate, to understand that. To understand, yeah, you have the power. You have much more power than you realize. And if you have the power, then you can push back against evil. And you can push forward for good. And you can do all of those things with the power that you have, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to be aware of it. If you think you're powerless, then you're right. You're powerless. But if you think you're powerful, you're also right. You are powerful. You have to believe that. And so when the Torah wants to tell us the Jewish people got out and they're on their own, it says that they were armed. It's a very interesting Yerushalmi, we call it. There's two Talmuds in Judaism, the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud Bavli is the main one that we rely on. It was established outside of Israel when most of the Jews had been exiled out of Israel, and the Talmud Yerushalmi was established inside of Israel. And so usually, if there's a conflict between them, the Talmud Bavli wins. When there's no conflict, if the Jerusalem Talmud teaches us something that the other one didn't, then we accept it. The other one didn't contradict it, just didn't teach it. This was taught. And so the Jerusalem Talmud says a very interesting thing, going back to that same phrase that we're starting out from. The Chamushim Ol Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim. That the Jewish people was Chamushim, which the main meaning of it is armed, as we said. But it's an unusual structure of a verb because the same three letters, the same three key letters of chamesh, are used as a noun for the number 5. So b'chamushim, which means they were armed, can also be read in an alternate meaning to say there were 5. There was 5. So you see the commentaries dealing with this. But the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, says that this is to teach us that they had 5 types of weapons. Is that interesting? Let's say, it doesn't, to my recollection, enumerate them. I may be wrong, but and obviously they didn't have a rifle because it wasn't invented yet. But they had, let's say, a bow and arrow. They had a sword. They had some kind of a smaller knife that and some kind of a club, maybe a thing that's with spikes like a mace. But the point is, they had 5 types of weapons, and so that's also an interesting message. Why you want to tell me they're armed? Okay, they're armed. No, they have 5 types of arms, which is all again reflecting the idea of individuality. That it doesn't mean that they're a bunch of robot killing machines. No, they're not looking to kill anybody. But the fact that one person is adept at a particular type of warfare, and another person is adept at a different kind, so you have 5 different weapons, is also an interesting message. Because again, it goes back to this point of that the ability to have a weapon represents freedom, and freedom represents individuality. You're not really free if everyone has to be the exact same because the state is demanding compliance and boxing you into a little space where the only way is to go along to get along and be a bunch of robots that are only free in the sense that you're not in jail, but they're not really free. Like you're living in the Soviet Union and there's cameras everywhere, there's spies everywhere, and so you're basically in jail at home. You're always in jail. Why? And once in a while they put a guy in jail. That was to up the ante a little bit. But basically everyone was in jail. They weren't free. And if you're not fully free, you're not fully human because there are things, all kinds of levels of you can't write an essay against the government. Not to come to your house to take it away. So you're not really free. You're not really free to think something through, to come to an honest conclusion, to present it, to try to sell it. And so I don't mean necessarily sell it for money, but advocate for it, get people to come over to your point of view. That's the beauty of real freedom. And the gun is right in there. It's so important to realize that. Because, again, part of the methodology that the anti-gun people use is that they make you seem like a brute of some kind. Why are you so attached to these weapons of war, of hostility, of aggression? What is your problem? This is your thing? You want to be able to beat people up? You want to be able to shoot people? Like you're the robber. You know what I mean? Like you're the murderer. What's your problem? The fascinating thing, I'm close with some of the people in the NRA, National Rifle Association. And on my book, one of the nice little blurbs that was written in favor of the book. The book, of course, is called Bullet In From Sinai, describing how the Torah, the Bible, actually has clearly the basis for the Second Amendment. With, of course, I also support the idea that once a person is a criminal, he loses his rights, and I brought the sources for that as well. But the point is that there's an expression there, there's an element there of that brings out it's at the heart of freedom in a way that other things, even freedom of speech, which is close, but in a certain way, actually the source of the Bible for freedom of speech is when the Jews composed their own song. That's actually a little bit later in the Bible, not a lot later, but almost immediately afterwards. they composed a song to celebrate their freedom, and that represents freedom of speech. But the point is that the freedom to defend yourself, the freedom to bear arms, the free is in a way the freedom to be all you can be, like that recruiting slogan that the Army used for a long time: "Be all you can be." Yes, it's important for a person to understand that about himself, to understand and herself, to understand your impact can be tremendous. You can't even anticipate, but you have to believe in that. And in a way, this right is intrinsic to believing in that. And like we said earlier, they try to make you out like a brute. What's your problem? They make you look like you're a small person. Oh, you're feeling so inadequate. Without a weapon in your hand, you have no self-confidence. You have no manliness. You must have the weapon. No, that's not how it works. It works exactly the opposite. No, I feel very confident. I spent my entire life working on my own character, trying to learn how to control my temper, trying to learn how to make smart decisions, right decisions, know when to push and resist, when not to resist. And then, based on that, I can heighten my power to express myself through having that weapon, through being a person who is entitled to have it, is aware, self-aware of being entitled to have it, of trained to be able to use it in a way that's constructive. This is a lesson in how to build yourself up as a person with self-knowledge, self-worth, and the ability to assert the truth, to fight for the truth. None of us wants to ever come to a time in the United States where we have to, fight against tyranny. But, and of course, we had this episode that took place when former Senator, former Governor John Ashcroft from Missouri was being confirmed as Attorney General under President George W. Bush. And the late Ted Kennedy, during the hearings for Ashcroft as the candidate for this appointed position. So Kennedy said to him, "I don't understand. You're saying that the Second Amendment is to fight tyranny?" And he said, "Yes." "So you're saying that what? That we're the tyranny? You're saying that I'm the tyrant?" So Ashcroft stumbled, and he didn't do well in that moment. But that was really a very important moment, and somebody who studies this and meditates on it and has a sense of the message here wouldn't make that stumble. That was an unfortunate stumble. But it says, no, Senator Kennedy, we're not naming who's the tyrant. There may come a time where we have to acknowledge that a tyrant comes along. But the point is, the human being has the capacity to identify the tyrant when it does come. You have the mind, you have the freedom, you have the will to say, no, this is the tyrant. I got to fight this guy. And B, to have the ability to fight, which means to have the weapons. So we all know all the stories of what it was like for Jews and others who had their weapons taken away, and they found it very, very difficult to resist tyranny. So we've all seen it play out in practice before our very eyes. But this is a key principle. Now let me just end with this very interesting episode in the book of Samuel, that it says that the Philistines, they lived right up against the Israelites. And once the Jews were living in Israel, but there were cities that belonged to the Philistines, and the Jews did not try to evict the Philistines from those cities. It's a long discussion whether they were obligated to or not. But the fact is that they were living side by side with the Philistines, but the Philistines were feeling hostile because the Jews had come back from Egypt. They didn't like it. And they wanted to fight. Now, the Philistines they were metal workers. And the verse describes how all the metal objects, the Jews are coming on long lines, standing on long lines to have their pitchforks sharpened, and things that they used in the field. You know, the plowshares sharpened, manufactured. It was all in the hands of the Philistines. And so, really, that could have been a beautiful thing of mutual respect. That's that thing. We have other areas of expertise. So the Jews went out making weapons. And what happened? At a certain point, the Philistines said, hey, we're the guys making them. We're just not going to sell any weapons to the Jews. And at a certain point, they thought, okay, we now created enough of an imbalance where we have such a high percentage of the weapons that we're going to now turn around and have an easy victory. And God arranged things, miraculously that they did not achieve the easy victory. But the lesson was learned. And from then forward, the Israelites always made sure to create their own ironworks and to manufacture their own tools and their own weapons. And so the Philistines ended up hurting their own economy because we didn't need them for the tools anymore either. But the bottom line is that a weapon is not intrinsically a negative. It's really a positive, because if everyone has their weapon and respects each other, then we all live together, work together, live happily ever after. We don't, and when the Messiah wants to come and turn the, everything into plowshares, that's great. But until that time, the weapon is actually a facilitator. It enables us to live freely, peacefully, and respecting each other, each one with their own message, with their own thought process, with their own expression. But each one has their weapon, and nobody's shooting anybody. Let's talk it over. The thing that I had started saying before and I forgot, I just started saying at the very end, that throughout my entire life, my entire adult life, I was always tracking, because I know that the press hates the NRA, the National Rifle Association. So I was always looking to see if the guy who killed, in any story where someone killed somebody, is he a member of the NRA? So I was convinced that if they found the guy who killed somebody who was a member of the NRA, they'd jump on him, they'd put it out there. And amazingly, I never found that to happen. That's an NRA, certainly in the Jewish group that our friend Mr. Waldman is doing in New York State, and with such tremendous impact going to the Supreme Court. We are not aggressive people, not looking to hurt anybody, not looking to attack anybody, not looking to rob anybody, just self-defense and the dignity of being able to live our lives, worship, and be good citizens of the United States of America. Thank you.
So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. I think it's a great lesson that everybody needs to be aware about. Let me just finish off with this. So if anybody wants to purchase the book, I made a short link, www.nysjgc.com/Sinai. If anybody wants to help us out and donate to our legal fund, those lawsuits don't happen by themselves, and tyrants will not be stopped till you drag them to court and force them to do it. And even after that, we had a couple of cases, even after the court granted certain stuff, we still had to take it a step further. Please go to www.nysjgc.com/donate. Anybody wants to check out our not-for-profit website, ujgc.org, or just generally check out our gun club website. The short URL is it's actually nyjgc.com, or New York State NYSJewishGunClub.com. Thanks everybody for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Chief.